Congratulations on finishing the book. I hope that you found it a worthwhile and enlightening experience, and hopefully if you're confused or frustrated with the ending, we can talk through a little bit of that now. Because I know the first time I read the end of Gatsby, I was just like, oh, I need somebody to talk about this with, because I just don't know how to wrap my head around it. Couple of things. On page 179 in my book, or right before the page break, towards the end of the book, Gatsby has just finished, or sorry, not Gatsby, Nick has just finished talking to Tom, and he says that he couldn't forgive him or like him, but I saw that what he had done was, to him, entirely justified. It was all very careless and confused. They were careless people, Tom and Daisy. They smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back into their money or their vast carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together and let other people clean up the mess they had made, which I think is a really intriguing definition, really, of the 1920s as a whole. It's this whole decade where laissez-faire was kind of the attitude, just kind of let it be. We're going to have fun now. If we get into trouble, it doesn't really matter. We're just going to spend all this money. And what ended up happening is exactly that. And F. Scott Fitzgerald had no way of knowing this because he's writing in the middle of the 1920s. He doesn't know the stock market is going to crash, but it did. And that's exactly what happened. People lived high and mighty in the 1920s, and they paid for it for decades afterwards. And thank goodness, really, that World War II came along and pulled them out of their economic slump, because otherwise they would have stayed there for a very long time. Another section that I wanted to point out to you at the very end, and kind of, I think, the moral of the story comes on page 180 in my book, or in the last 3 paragraphs in yours, if you don't have the same as mine. He's looking at Gatsby's house and what once represented. And he says, for a transitory, enchanted moment, man must have held his breath in the presence of this continent, compelled into an aesthetic contemplation he neither understood nor desired, face to face for the last time in history with something commensurate to his capacity for wonder. So he says, the 1920s were a very beautiful decade. It was a time of great extravagance, and anybody who could buy anything on credit could have a good life. But it was fake, and so it was this time when dreams were achievable, but they were fake dreams. They couldn't follow through on themselves. They were built on sand. He goes along and says he had come a long way to his blue dawn. He's talking about Gatsby, and his dream must have seemed so close that he could hardly fail to grasp it. He did not know that it was already behind him, somewhere back in that vast obscurity beyond the city where the dark fields of the Republic rolled on under the night. Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and one fine morning. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. I find that a really interesting last image. There are a couple of different things that I like about it. The idea of running faster and stretching out our arms farther and trying so much harder to grasp our dreams, but the sentence isn't finished, which is frustrating, because then you can read it in a couple different ways. Does F. Scott Fitzgerald mean that we're not so good to go after our dreams, or does it mean that we are going to reach them, or that we might, or that some people will, or what happens if we do? Are we going to end up like Nick and Tom and Daisy and Gatsby, or are we like, where are we going? What is it actually going to end up being? And then we have the last line, so we beat on boats against the current. So we're working against where the world wants to take us, borne back ceaselessly into the past. So we're going to be carried back. But we talk a lot about, and especially as students of history, you find, at least I find, that when I study the past, it actually helps me understand and to contemplate and to move forward into the future. So for me, I read the end of this book, and the message to me is that it is good to dream, that it is good to have something that you're working for and something that is worth fighting for, as long as it is not something holding you back. Now, how do you determine that? How do you discover that? Well, that's really hard. It takes a lot of trial and error, a lot of asking questions, talking to people around you that you trust, adults, teachers, friends, reading history and reading about stories of people who've been before you. I think it requires an intense sense of connectivity between where you are right now and the people around you, and the people that have always been around you, and the people who haven't ever been around you but were at one point in this earth. And it's hard to do, but I think it's really important. So for me, the ultimate message of The Great Gatsby is, aside from not living in the past, is that it is good to dream, as long as the dream that you have is worth pursuing. So, that's The Great Gatsby. I hope that you enjoyed this book and that you learned something from it. I think the writing in this book is beautiful. I think the characters are really fascinating. And even though I leave it every time with a great desire to just kind of just strangle Daisy, I really do hope that things turn out well for her, because otherwise it'd be sad if she remained a child forever. Hopefully the Great Depression will do good things for her and for us as we head into that decade of study in World War II as well. So, there's Gatsby for you. Best of luck as you prepare for your midterm examinations, and I will see you in the next packet.